But
It's like,
that's a good thing. That's called skilling up, right? Like
for sure.
they have to be able to skill up. I mean, anybody who feels threatened by AI, the idea is, well, then skill up.
Mm,
Make AI your employee. And the second you look at it that way and you say, okay, how do I make AI my employee so I become more effective and focus on my productivity, not keeping my job, then that all of a sudden becomes an enabler rather than a disabler. Because if you become the person who can control it, now you're the person who is in that dominant position within the business. And welcome back to the Money, Mindset, and Mentoring Podcast. We are super excited today. We have Ray Dogum here. He is, I just got to tell you this right away. Right from the very beginning, I was like, you need to get on the podcast because we were talking right away about your Health Unchained thing, which I just thought was so incredibly interesting and poignant right now. But I know that's not what you're all about because you've got the Vibe Bio thing that you go and you run their podcast there. You got so many things. So we got 30 minutes and we're going to cover everything. So we got a lot to talk about. So Ray, thanks very much for being on the show.
Yeah, Steve, it's really great to be on the show, and thanks for inviting me. I really appreciate it. So maybe I can quickly just start with my bio and background.
Yeah, man.
So actually, I'm a chemical engineering by background, so I might have not told you that, but I ended up shifting my career goal and focusing more on the business side of healthcare, actually. So I got very interested in how the healthcare system in the US works and even globally. I pursued an MBA, and then I started working at a telehealth company called Amwell for a few years and realized how broken the healthcare system really is. So that sort of led me on this path to learn about alternative technologies to solve healthcare. One thing that came up was blockchain technology for the healthcare industry. So I got really passionate about that and interested. So that's the reason I started Health Unchained, the podcast that you briefly mentioned. And I started that in 2018. And the purpose of that was really just to start these conversations and have people who are actually trying to use blockchain or Web3 or tokens or NFTs or crypto, whatever you want to call it. How do you take these decentralization technologies and apply it into healthcare, biotech, pharmacy management? And I just thought it'd be great to have these people on the show and interview them. So we have over 100 episodes on that show. But more recently, I started getting involved in the biotech space, and more specifically, how does artificial intelligence and AI, I know a lot of buzzwords here, so sorry about that, Steve. But I thought it was, really interesting to take these technologies and see how they could be applied. Because one thing in biotech you may or may not know, or audience may or may not know, is it takes over $1 billion to get a drug approved. And it takes many, many years, oftentimes about a decade or so, to get them through clinical trials. So, being invested in a drug program. So if you're a big pharma company, you might have 10 or 20 different drugs that you're working on currently to move them from phase one, actually from preclinical work to phase one clinical, phase two, and phase three. And you want to make sure that you're putting your money in the right place. So a lot of the work that goes into diligencing these programs is very complicated. It takes a lot of time. You need expert scientists. And what we're trying to do at Vibe Bio, which is where I currently am, is develop a tool or software that helps these people analyze the market space, analyze the mechanism of action for a specific drug, maybe the overall clinical market landscape too. And I'll pause there. I said a lot there, so I'll hear your questions.
Yeah, so I mean, there's so many things we'll hit. We're going to hit from the end and then go back to the beginning. Is probably a good process because I think when you're talking about AI, which I'm super passionate about, especially AI in the podcast space, but with AI in the biotech space, long time ago I worked with a company called Parexel. They're a clinical trials organization doing phase 1 to phase 4 trials. And they ran very hard on ensuring that quality testing happened as the third party tester for a lot of the big pharmaceutical companies. And back then there was a lot of pressure to shorten the cycle of drug discovery, looking at your phase 1, looking at your phase 2, and obviously 3 and 4. And so what you're saying is this is something you're bringing in to help the pharmaceutical companies or to help the the technology companies like them?
Yeah, that's a good question. So right now we're sort of talking to different types of customers and clients.
Hmm.
So one is the big pharma type of company where they have drugs already in pipeline that they need to prioritize or need to make decisions around. But we're also talking to consulting companies that might be sort of doing the same type of work. We're also talking to VCs and other types of investors and banks where they're deciding on which companies to invest in. So in order to know which companies to invest in, they want to be able to determine which drugs are actually going to work or they're going to get approval. So the exact user right now of the software is sort of we're figuring it out, I guess you could say.
Hmm.
But we see a lot of good interest from big pharma as well as like investors.
I could see definitely a really good play in the investor space, because if you could, another use case is my brother runs a company called Data Parrot that basically takes an overlay on top of something like HubSpot and looks at all the funnels and says, based on the activities that a salesperson's taking, is the forecast actually going to be real? Well, what you're saying is it's doing very much the same thing as a deep dive into the pharmacology of it or to the marketability of a drug, and saying, is this actually a really good investment for the VC or not? And it's probably able to do that in pretty short order.
Yeah, it is able to do it in short order. The issue is, as you can imagine with AI, it's still not a perfect science. So there's still a human in the middle, a human in the
Mhm.
loop who's making sure what the output is makes sense. So yeah, but ideally that's sort of where we're trying to go.
Nice, nice. And so if it takes, I mean, I think the same thing applies for him. There's always a human involved because it presents data, and then the human has to look at that data and say, is this data accurate? Number one, we all know AI can sometimes go on a real spin out. But then if it's accurate, then is it going to give me the right direction? That's, I guess, the next step of AI is to say, not only look at the data, but then actually action on that data. Are you sort of seeing that as something that you guys are driving towards?
Yeah, I think for now there is no need or there is no requests that we're hearing where we'd want the AI to drive some sort of action. It's more about information
Hmm.
and potentially helping or augmenting the process for a researcher. So instead of Googling something, finding an article, reading the entire article, looking at the sources of that article and seeing how they relate to what the claims are in the first article you're reading, all of that work is sort of, we're trying to augment it with AI so that you
Yeah,
can kind of do that faster. So that what's most important gets presented to you immediately in front of your face. That's sort of like the goal. Again, there's might be things that the AI misses. There might be things that it makes up. So that's sort of like what we're trying to work through now is
yeah,
fine tuning the level of detail and making sure that the results are something that people would actually want to see.
yeah. And I think the idea that AI, especially when it comes to drug discovery, and there's a lot of clinical papers that get written that don't get read, and the idea that AI can go through a lot of those papers and really suss out something that might have some good marketability or might have something that's unique value proposition tied to that paper, then it becomes less of a who knows who, more of a who knows what kind of a situation, and can give a lot more exposure to people who are producing some amazing results, but just not getting the shine on them.
Yeah, one thing you just said there was it's not about it could be the future could be it's not about who it's about what because oftentimes the way it works now is let's say you're doing an investigation for a specific drug program, you're gonna call up your friends who are experts in oncology or experts in a certain area and get their advice or contract with them for a few months so they can do some research and due diligence for you on a specific aspect of a company's um, data room essentially. And instead of doing that and hiring 5 or 10 different consultants, you can leverage this AI to sort of get closer to the finish line without the use of a consultant, for example, an expert consultant. I think, if you want to make the final decision, you'll want to get that extra verification with a human who
Yep.
knows what they're doing. But this sort of, like you said, it speeds up that time to um, essentially get the drug developed faster, hopefully.
Yeah, and I mean, if you think of even just like peer reviews or anything like that, where it can get just somewhat you can peer review with some AI and just see if it actually can pass that litmus test. I think that there's some interesting use cases within that space.
I think that would be fascinating to have AI start to do peer reviews and give, specific red flags to people, or what are the risks that you're seeing with this program. That's essentially what we want to try to do. Um, though there's a few complications here. One is that, there are different types of drugs, different modalities of drugs, and so you have small molecule gene therapies. They each work a little bit differently. We don't really know everything about these technologies yet, so there's still a lot of research and development happening. And so what I'm trying to say is we can't really rely on the AI to pick up everything, just because the AI uses data. We don't have all the data for these types of new technologies. So there's a cycle here.
Yeah.
But if you think about the way the future is going, we're constantly adding more structured and high quality data into these repositories. As we continue to do that, and as the models start to understand these patterns behind drug development programs in more detail, we're going to start to see some really interesting business models around how to, do drug discovery, conduct clinical trials or design clinical trials, how to recruit patients. So it'll be really interesting to see all that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I find it interesting when you talk about the large language model of AI and the one thing I always wonder about, and it feels like sometimes when you're using if you just think of using ChatGPT, when you're just kind of playing around with it, and you've got this one long thread that it eventually gets like, I remember I went to this one pizza place and I ordered a pizza and they had this special, you could have whatever you wanted. And I just said, put everything on it. And the lady said, no. And I said, why? She goes, it's going to taste like crap. And I said, oh, she says, what you need is do this, 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 and based on you, and it's going to taste amazing. And she was right. And so I always wonder that if we keep on ingesting, if AI just keeps on ingesting all of this data, do we get to this sort of large morass that just becomes undigestible? And that's where it starts popping out, a little bit of nonsense.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not sure I understand your question exactly. So I get the idea, like there's just so much data out there that it becomes like just a
It
giant
is
pool
too
of.
much. Yeah. When does it get to a point that you have to say, we've got to put some barriers on knowledge for AI
I
so to
see.
become so much more concise in its knowledge pattern rather than the proverbial generalist.
I hear what you're saying. Yeah, I totally understand. You're saying because of the way LLMs currently work, it's very much a what's the most probable term or phrase or syllable that comes after this that a human would appreciate or understand or find value in.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that doesn't really work for everything, right?
Yep.
Especially when you talk about science or you talk about specific, maybe quantitative stuff. So, or even subjective stuff. I think what we're going to see is these knowledge models getting built out specific. So you'll have an expert AI that's very good at understanding, oncology only, or maybe just a specific component of oncology, or maybe just one specific rare brain disorder. And, or maybe they'll just, learn to understand how the, lymphatic system works only. And then based on the lymphatic system, what would the immune system do if we added this small molecule and introduced it into this person's body with this genetics? So there's a lot of complicated components that are going to be like created. And I think it's happening now. We're seeing like so many artificial intelligence, machine learning companies out there, all trying to specialize in their own niche. A lot of them are using LLMs as a base. And I think that's interesting. I think over time we'll see like knowledge models, and what I'm kind of concerned about actually is the largest companies are going to basically own all the data, and all the small guys won't be able to compete.
Yeah.
So that's something that I'm concerned about or just thinking about. I'm not sure how it'll play out, and I'm not a super expert in AI as well. I'm sort of learning as we go.
Yeah. 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 I wonder about that as well. When you look at, people used to say that, money has value, but data has more. And because if you own the data, you can. There's just so much you can do with it. And I think that's something that we're definitely going to see with these pillars that are coming out. I mean, we look at this last debacle that happened with the release of that one Google one or whatever it was, that was it Google or Microsoft, that just came out, where it had a very heavy social spin on the outcomes that came out of the large language model. And so the idea that the large language model, not only it's going to be that big data center that people want to access, and they own the kitty, but also they can control the kitty and give it a spin. Is I wonder about that, especially when you start thinking about spaces like in biotech or in your health and chain, talking about in that space, or anything like that. How much of this can be modeled out that, yeah, it's good because the model says it's good because we told the model to say it's good.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I don't know. I think that, there'll be some guardrails against that. I don't think, companies will be able to get away with doing some like manipulative activities behind the scenes. I think there will be some market demand for transparency. That being said, though, as you know, like OpenAI was a nonprofit, supposed to be open source organization. Now it's closed, for-profit organization. So things can change. Incentives can push people to make certain decisions. So I don't know how it'll all play out, but it's been fascinating to watch in the last even just year or two, how much has
It's
happened.
been incredible. It's been absolutely incredible to watch.
Even
And
the stuff we're using for our podcast, editing, promoting, it's been pretty cool to see the tools that are out there for podcasters.
oh, I know, like with us with the podcast AI.com stuff, like to be able to just transcript everything, to be able to make all the cuts and everything like that with a single click of a button, to be able to create an AI version of myself to host the show, all of that so quickly, be able to get that done. It's just like that used to take with a team of a couple people of VAs to kind of put that stuff together based on their specialists, nature of how VAs work. And now you can do it with just a click of a button. It's a whole different world.
It is, yeah. It's kind of cool because you have more people now that have access to these sorts of tools that can, share their voice, whatever
Yeah.
their voice might be,
Yeah.
in a way that people can identify with. So it's good. It's also, like you said, the team that used to do it now has to do something else. So there's this
But that's a good thing. That's called skilling up, right? Like they have
sure.
to be able to skill up. I mean, anybody who feels threatened by AI, the idea is, well, then skill up.
Mm,
Make AI your employee. And the second you look at it that way, you say, okay, how do I make AI my employee so I become more effective and focus on my productivity, not keeping my job? Then that all of a sudden becomes an enabler rather than a disabler. Because if you become the person who can control it, now you're the person who is in that dominant position within the business. Because everybody else who's afraid of it and running from it, yeah, they're probably not going to have a job.
that's true. Absolutely. I think it's the people that are using AI that are going to have a serious competitive advantage in the market, in the labor markets, I think. And we're
Absolutely.
seeing that already. I mean, with layoffs and things.
Yeah.
So
Now, the idea of pivoting over to the health and chain, which I think is a really good pivot on that, because I think the idea of saying what is real and what is not real, one of those things I always wonder about with blockchain, is this the new identifier? Is this the new way that we're going to make sure that you are you and I am me when we come into this under this discussion here?
that's a really good question. And the attribute of immutability behind blockchain, which allows an entity essentially to verify a certain event has happened in the past without any doubt, is really, really important. Right now, we typically depend on companies or governments to sort of be the source of truth. With blockchain, it's really strange because now you have this decentralized system that is providing a sense the source of truth. So nobody can really like argue against it. It's sort of like, well, our hands are tied. So that's really important. One for individual privacy, also one for being able to identify who you are to an authority if you needed to. Very important for healthcare. Every time you go to a hospital or a clinic, they'll ask you for your either medical ID number or date of birth for sure, your name just to verify, and they'll do that like every visit as well, because it's so important. But having it on a decentralized system allows for like no, I would say it doesn't allow for no fraud, but it diminishes the ability for somebody to conduct fraud on those systems. And I think that's really important. On a side note, a different way blockchain can be leveraged for this is, combating deep fakes, for example, or any sort of videos, images that are created and not signed by an official person that who you would expect to have created it, can basically be assumed as fake. So in the future, every video or image that doesn't have a blockchain signature or a cryptographic signature by the right person, I think will be assumed fake. That's how I see, the trend.
I'm with you 100%. I agree 100% on that. The ability for me to be able to just take a little bit of code, throw it into a piece of software, and have that create a full video version of myself, that you would not be able to tell anything around that it's unbelievable, and I've had many people not even realize that that's not me. And so that authentication token to say, no, in fact, either A, it was me, or B, authentication token number 2, it was authorized by me, because anybody could just take a video of anybody. They could take a video of it right now and make you, try to, hold up an airport or something.
Yeah.
And that's just no good.
It's certainly no good. And I think since we're at this like inflection point, so the technology is really good, but still not like super accessible by everyone yet, especially the really good video stuff. There's going to be this need to authenticate the user. It's really important. Otherwise, it'll be, sheer chaos.
Yeah, absolutely, it will be. I mean, the idea
especially in this political environment too.
100%. Like, how do we know that vote was, from that person? How do we know that person was actually there? How do we know the video of those people in that room counting the ballots is real? I mean, all of these things can be so manufactured. The only way you can actually, tie that together is saying that this camera, that is an analog camera that's recording this room, has a digital authentication token that then speaks to the next little bit, and you carry that token through the whole, passage of the data file. And that's probably the only way that you could authenticate that some video is actually real.
Yeah, and I've actually heard of some companies starting to do this. I don't know there was a camera company that had some sort of hardware embedded within their camera that was blockchain enabled.
Interesting.
I don't know if it was like, I don't think it was, I kind of want to pull it up. I think it was like
Nokia or something.
Carl Zeiss.
Carl Zeiss. Yeah.
Carl Zeiss.
Yeah. The lens people.
I think so. Anyways, yeah. I mean, there's lots of experiments happening now.
Yeah.
Yeah. They don't want to take up time. No worries.
It's all
we can
good.
move on from that.
Yeah. There's always the rabbit holes to go down, right? Of how interesting this stuff can be, because I mean, let's face it, the world is completely changing. And I mean, we just saw just recently, look at what happened with blockchain. I don't know if you've been watching Bitcoin, from that side. Like, man, did that thing just spike in the last little bit?
Yeah, the markets have been like super bullish, you can say, recently. We'll see what happens. A lot of people are saying it's from the ETF, both the Bitcoin and the Ethereum ETFs that have been the Bitcoin ETF has been approved for many companies, but the ETH ETFs are still under application. So we'll see how that goes. But anyways, I think there's a lot of hype around that. Again, one thing people have to still realize is cryptocurrency is still primarily a lot of speculation. There's still the numbers, the value is still based on speculation. As time progresses and as applications and use cases come up, the speculation factor will slowly decrease and the utility factor will start to increase. And I think that's something that will take decades. But even in the last, it's been like 14 years, right, with Bitcoin. Even in those last 14 years, we've seen the utility of the cryptocurrencies going up. And the speculation, since it's relatively still so early, speculation is going to go up and down. It's kind of fascinating. It's just human nature. I mean, we speculate on stocks. We speculate on, foreign currencies. So speculation isn't something that we need to completely get rid of. It's just part of the way the system works at this point.
Yeah, I think it's a alternative form for storing wealth. I don't think to me, I still have not seen the use case for, I'm going to grab my Visa and I'm going to go pay with Bitcoin. The amount of people who would accept Bitcoin as they would pay with Bitcoin, I don't think that the market is there at this point for that. I think it's a storage of wealth. Whether that wealth goes up or down, I agree with you, is 100% speculative. But what I'm really more interested in is the token side of things.
Mm-hmm.
The idea of that true proof of truth, that this actually happened or this belongs to this. And I think that's where I think it really has its merit.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've seen some companies have actually interviewed. What they're doing is specifically for NFTs, they're using NFTs as prescriptions, essentially. So you can sort of give the NFT to the pharmacy, and once they have it, they can give you your drug, and all that. Those transactions are available to whoever needs to see them. It might not be publicly totally available because they have some, guardrails around that. But the concept of a unique token that can transfer digitally, that's very novel. We haven't had that before. Most
Absolutely.
of the internet has been content and copyable content, essentially.
Yeah.
And not necessarily traceable. So it's kind of important to continue developing this space and this ecosystem.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to move forward because of the idea of like driver's licenses, the idea of your health card, the idea of your tax account, the idea of your Visa, your MasterCard, your bank account. If all of them became tokenized, it'd be pretty darn hard to defraud that system.
Theoretically, right? I mean, like, that's the great thing about history is we can see how past technologies have enabled nefarious activity too.
Yeah.
But we've also been able to kind of combat them through different ways. I think one example that pops to mind is, excuse me, you mentioned like IDs. Let's say you're 22 years old and you want to go into a bar. If you want to do that now, you got to show your ID. The bouncer knows how old you are, and because he sees the ID card. But does he have to see exactly how old you are, your date of birth, your eye color, where you live, your address, your full name? They don't necessarily need to know those things to get you in. They just need to know how old you are. So wouldn't it make sense to have a system where you can identify yourself? Here's my picture. You scan the person, some kind of NFT card or something, and then it says, yep, this person's over 21. And they don't have to see anything else. So I think those sorts of potential privacy preserving models can start to show up.
Well, I mean, if we look at the future of, I love Westworld. That's a great show.
Mm-hmm.
And in one of the seasons, one of the characters is out in the world, and they're walking up towards the hotel, and they just book the hotel. Everything transacts, and they don't bring out a credit card. They don't bring out any ID. They don't bring out anything because it's all tied to what it seems to be anyways. It's all tokenized. And so that ability to be able to move so fluidly through a currency system and an exchange of value seems really interesting as a future. I mean, almost dystopian, but interesting nonetheless.
It is interesting. The thing with Westworld is you have an AI now potentially booking hotel rooms, buying weapons maybe. So there's a lot of thought that has to go into this. And that's why I think a lot of leaders are really concerned about how AI is developing and the speed at which it's developing.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll have to see. I mean, we're pretty resilient as humans. I think it's going to be fine. We'll figure it out. Essentially, at the end of the day, we could still turn off the machine. At
this point.
At this point. And
but some question that, because if you said we can turn off the machine, but can we survive when we do? Because the amount of people who, the only way they know to get food is to go to the grocery store, drive through the drive-through. The only way they know how to, the ability to be able to self-sustain as a population is very low, because we are so integrated as a society now in our supply chain.
Yeah, it's a very good point. I don't know. I guess we'll have to see. And I was thinking about turning the machine off. We can't really turn off Bitcoin. I mean, I think we could. I don't think it'd happen unless, yeah, I don't know. You'd have to have like many. I'm not going to get into how to destroy Bitcoin theories, because there's many a podcasts about that. But there's not many ways to bring it down. Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. Well, this has been an absolute pleasure having a chat on AI, on blockchain, and all about you, man. Like, it's been, as I said before, I knew it was going to be a great conversation, and I stick by that. I really enjoyed our chat today.
Thanks, Steve. I appreciate your time, and thanks for having me on the show.
Awesome. And for them to catch up with your show to learn a little bit more, do you want to just share a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'd love to share. So for anyone in your audience, if they're interested in learning about blockchain and how it impacts the healthcare industry, I'd encourage you to check out healthunchained.org or .com. Either way works. And I'm on LinkedIn as well. You can find me, Ray Dogum. And I'm also doing another podcast called Vibecast right now, which is more focused on biotech entrepreneurs going through their journeys. So thanks, Steve. Appreciate your time.
Awesome. And Ray, thanks very much for coming. And guys, this is the Money, the Mindset, the Mentoring podcast, and we'll see you on the next one.